is important to our region's economy and to collaborate with others to help improve the economic vitality and life quality in Midcoast, Maine. Today, we are pleased to present Rockport Select Board Chair and Broadband Advocate Debra Hall. Debra is going to talk to us about the Midcoast Broadband Coalition, which she also chairs. Debra spent 40 years as an international corporate, regulatory, and technology attorney. 10 years ago, she co-founded a technology company holding a registered patent in artificial intelligence. And prior to Debra and her husband Bob's arrival in Maine, she successfully led an effort to bring fiber optic to 541 homes in Naples, Florida. Debra believes that access to high-speed internet is no longer an option, is an essential driver of today's economy and social fabric. During Debra's presentation, as Chris said, please post questions by clicking on the chat button at the bottom of the screen and enter your question. We'll present questions in the order in which they are posted. Welcome, Debra. The screen is yours.
Thank you, Rich. Thanks, everybody. It's great to see so many familiar faces here. Some of you I don't know, but hope to know soon. Thanks for inviting me to talk to you about broadband or high-speed internet. We use the terms interchangeably. But most importantly, I think to this group and to many of us is the fact that high-speed internet is noted as really an essential in our economy today and just to our way of life. It's important, obviously, to telework, to telehealth, to remote learning. As bad as the COVID pandemic has been for everyone, on the broadband scene, it's really helped accelerate the effort, not only in this region, but across the nation, as people realize that the internet is far more important than just accessing Netflix. Angus King is famous for saying that people can work where they live rather than having to live where they work. And I think that in today's environment, just in our region, we've seen the great influx of people moving to this area from other places as large corporations shut down their high rises and headquarters in big cities. So it's become more and more important than ever. I thought that I would just clear out some of the definitions a little bit today for us, so we know what exactly we're talking about when we're saying, or when I'm saying high-speed internet, or broadband or fiber to the home. And then my plan was to tell you a little bit about what Rockport had done in the past, what Rockport and Camden have done, and what we're trying to do now going forward on a regional basis. So starting with, and please feel free to submit questions, and I'm not going to take a half an hour to talk here, so I'd really like to just hit on a few major points and then make this as interactive as possible. High-speed internet, according to the FCC, is 25 megabits down and 3 megabits upload speed, which I think have all realized is not sufficient. And of course, download speeds you can think of as consuming things from the internet. Upload speeds is sort of sending things off to the internet for the most part. Again, as we get into things like Zoom calls and accessing the internet, backups, streaming, using the internet for things that people had not necessarily previously done, especially during this past year, you realize the need for what we call symmetrical speeds. And symmetrical basically means that you have the same speed uploading to the internet as you have downloading from the internet. One of the advantages to fiber optic is that it indeed allows you to have symmetrical speeds, uploading, downloading at the same speed. When we talk about broadband, some people talk about broadband in the sense of, well, you can get broadband from cable and wireless and other ways, and that's all true. But really what we're focused on is fiber optic. Fiber optic is clearly the most reliable, the fastest, and ultimately, at the end of the day, the cheapest way of providing truly high-speed internet to every home. So fiber, just a few fun facts about fiber is that fiber is, the fiber strand is thinner than a human hair. And that the entire weight, let me tell you about this book real quick. There's a book called Fiber written by Susan Crawford. And I've done, tons of work and research on this area, but I think that this book is more than you'll ever want to know about fiber and the internet. But a lot of the things that I'm going to refer to today are not just from Debra Hall, but they're from Susan Crawford and other experts like her. That fiber, the entire weight, Susan points out that the entire weight of data on the internet can be transmitted through a single strand of fiber. One strand can carry 3 billion phone calls or web sessions, one strand. And we talked about a strand being thinner than human hair, okay? The submarine cables that go underneath the oceans, between continents, between cities here in the United States or any other nation, developed nation in the world, is all done through fiber. And the submarine cable, at least at the time that Susan wrote her book, and I don't think that's changed, the fiber that connects the US and China only consists of 8 strands of fiber. So fiber is pretty much what we're going to be talking about today, and really what we focus on at the coalition that I'm going to tell you about, and certainly what Rockport is focused on in building their 1 mile network, which I'll talk about as well. There's a lot to be said about wireless, 5G, you hear about it. Susan has a great explanation in the book about 5G and how it's a complement to fiber, but it's not a replacement for fiber. In order to make 5G work, you have to have fiber to those 5G devices. And having 5G across the nation will actually require, she says, 20 times the number of cell towers we currently have, with cell towers even in the middle of towns and neighborhoods. So there's a lot to be said about that, pro and con. One funny thing is that she talks about how fiber does not degrade over hundreds of miles. Yet 5G does. It gets blocked by, first off, only goes a short distance. It gets blocked by things like weather walls and what she calls big walking bags of water, which is how she refers to people. So anyway, so that's my little primer on fiber and high-speed internet, and hopefully that's more than you want to hear, and we'll move on to the practical aspects. So Rockport led the way with this really in the state in terms of a municipal network by creating a 1.1 mile network. It was announced back in 2014, but a lot of the work had already been done at that point. That municipal network is what we call a 1 gig network. So it delivers 1,000 megabits symmetrical. So 1,000 up, 1,000 down of speed, of bandwidth. It was done as a 3-way partnership between the town of Rockport, Maine Media, and GWI. The cost of that 1 mile network was $75,000, of which Rockport paid $30,000 and took it out of TIF funding. So it didn't cost a dime in terms of taxpayer funding. Rockport Select Board then, which was before my time on the board, they then proposed to take that 1 mile network and expand it throughout the town. In order to do that, they got a cost estimate for a study that was several $100,000. The voters at a town meeting voted that down. One of the anti-voice, it was a fairly close vote, but one of the people leading that effort actually owned one of the local wireless companies, unbeknownst to the select board at the time. In any event, that probably was a good thing because the amount of cost for that study was really very high. And those costs have come down now so that we can get those kinds of feasibility studies done for a fraction of the cost that was being proposed. So it was a little bit too much, too soon, too early. Excuse me. So after that, I had been on the technology committee. I had been drafted to be on the technology committee right before that vote was taken. So I really had nothing to do with the vote other than hoping that we would move the process along. In the intervening couple of years before I was elected in June of 2018, we were doing some behind the scenes work. We put together an ad hoc committee with, or task working group, I guess we called it, with Camden. And we looked at what had happened in Rockport, what needed to be done differently. We met with a lot of people. We interviewed a lot of experts in the area during the course of a couple-year period. And then we started writing some educational pieces, which Audra, who I know is on the call, and Bill Post, Audra Kaler Bell, and Bill Post, our two town managers, had published. And those 6 or 7 articles, each focused on something different. They focused on either the technology, telework, remote learning, all those various aspects that are so important to high-speed internet and broadband. And the last article was published about right at the time, right before the COVID pandemic hit. So I guess you could say it was interesting timing. Then I think during COVID, we had all the education we needed and continue to get all the education we need in terms of the need for this, for better high-speed internet in our region. So what started out as an effort to try to get other towns interested in this a few years ago has now resulted in towns coming to us and saying, we want to join on to your efforts, which is really fantastic, obviously. Camden and Rockport decided earlier this year that we wanted to, we always wanted to go forth and have towns add on later on, but we decided to kind of change gears during the course of this year and go out to those other towns to invite them to join us in the ground level of things. And we did reach out to a few towns, but a number of those towns have joined us. And as I said, we have gotten towns who have come to us on their own. So right now we have formed what we currently call the Midcoast Broadband Coalition, although that title is going to change soon. Sorry for the dog barks. The current title, unfortunately, is too close to the main Broadband Coalition, and particularly the acronym. So we are going to change it probably to a catchier name, but for the moment, I'll call it the Midcoast Broadband Coalition. We currently have in the coalition Camden, Rockport, Hope, Lincolnville, Northport, and Rockland. Towns that are also considering joining us include Union, Thomaston, South Thomaston, and I know Owl's Head is activating their own broadband committee again, and they are reaching out to us to keep us informed about what they're doing. And they're looking at and determining whether to interface or coordinate with other towns. So right now, those are the towns that have been participating in the meetings. We are in the process of pulling together the actual structure of the group, which is a little bit free-flowing at the moment. And as Rich notes, I chair it, and we have right now about 30 people on conference calls. So obviously we need to streamline that, but we want to streamline it in a way that everybody truly has a voice and a seat at the table. So we're pursuing that. So I'll take a pause here. Whoever's looking at the questions, can you tell if there's questions with respect to what broadband is or anything like that I might want to answer before I go on?
Well, let's see. I'll jump into the second question. was from Barry Timms. Given that not all rural areas in Maine have practical access to fiber optic broadband, what is the future for broadband satellite or wireless service?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So as we get into, I think the best way to answer that is I'll accelerate something I was going to mention to you. Our next steps on the coalition really are to raise enough funding in order to engage a consultant that will help us to design a system. Calais and Baileyville, a couple of other areas that I'm going to talk about in a minute, have done this in a structure that I'm going to talk about. And they really have done it through fiber, but there are obviously other modes that we can tap into, and that's all part of the design process that we need to look at. Whether or not it's fiber out to all reaches of the affected geographical area, or whether there's a combination of technologies. And those are all things that have to be discussed by the group and decided by the group. But it also has to have, we have to be informed by some consultants that will help us in that regard.
Thank you, Deb. Hi, this is Matt Brown, also on the committee with Richard. This comes from Diane Lebson. Can you talk about the necessity of these regional broadband coalitions? Wouldn't a statewide approach be more efficient, cheaper than this mosaic approach?
Yeah, I think a statewide approach is going to, would be theoretically better or more efficient, one might expect, but I don't think it's going to result in anything that we need in any kind of time that we want to experience this in. So I think that's why towns like Calais and Baileyville and Millinocket and East Millinocket and Medway, for example, have all formed, the first two towns I mentioned, joined by Alexander, have formed Down East Broadband Utility, which is acronym is DBU. Another one is, I think it's called Arcatawden, but it's Millinocket, East Millinocket, and Medway, and they have formed a regional approach too. Obviously, when you certainly don't want to go down to it's difficult to go down to the town level because for obvious reasons, but at the level of the state, it just won't get done. So I think that the regional approach is going to be a lot better for us, and that's certainly the view of all of the towns that are participating in the effort. Do you have any other questions you want to ask me about right now?
Well, okay, I guess from John Goss, there's one related to this, that what towns have not responded that your committee would like to interact with? Rural areas may provide real estate that is more attainable by future workforce families, but this will not be practical without symmetrical broadband.
I would say that there's no towns that we have out to that have not responded to us or responded in a positive manner. So any of the towns that are not on the list that I mentioned, we just haven't reached out to, but that doesn't mean that we're not happy to have them approach us and consider being part of the effort. Going back now for a second to the regional utility district I mentioned, this is just one example of a structure, but it's an example that is catching on a lot of popularity. And that is that the individual towns get together, as I said, with the DBU and then also separately with the Arcatawden group. And they create a utility district, which is permitted by state law. There's a provision in state law that was added not long ago that specifically allows towns to group together and form an interlocal agreement for the purpose of delivering broadband internet services or designing or doing all the things associated with that. I was just talking to Danny Sullivan the other day, who's the head of the DBU, and I touch base with him from time to time. And he mentioned that everybody, or that they have built their network. ISPs, or in other words, internet service providers, ISPs. It's an open access network, so ISPs come to them and they deliver services and they compete on that network. That is the type of network, albeit 1 mile, that Rockport has, where you have open access and you have providers competing on that open access network. Then it obviously, the competition keeps prices in check or drives prices down. What happens with the utility district is for every residence or every commercial enterprise that signs on, the utility gets paid a portion of that revenue that comes in every month. And then that goes to the utility instead of going to corporate profits. It goes to the not-for-profit utility, which then uses that for maintenance, operations, and upgrades and expansion of the network. And then through that process, they expand the network in phases, obviously from the most dense areas to the least dense areas by bringing in that revenue, which enables them to do that. By the way, Danny Sullivan has noted that 40 towns have come to them, to Downey's Broadband, Calais, Baileyville. Now Alexander has joined. They've got 40 towns that have come to them and asked them to join their network. And as far as people, they've got people signing up every day. They had thought that the network would be paid for within 15 years. Now I think they think the network's going to be paid for a lot sooner than that. And then as the network is paid for, those funds come in and continue to come into the town. So you're reinvesting all the time into an asset that the towns then own through the utility district.
Deb, thanks. Why don't you continue with your talk? We have other questions, but we'll hold them till the end.
Yep, that's okay. That was part of what I wanted to point out to you guys. I think on funding is the last thing that I really wanted to talk about. The biggest, obviously the biggest issue is, well, how much does it cost? The first phase of this has to be hiring the consultant. And again, several years ago, as I mentioned, Rockport was prepared. Well, part of Rockport was prepared, part of Rockport wasn't prepared to spend several $100,000 just to do the feasibility study and design for Rockport for one town. Now, Rockport has a number that was given to it from one of the leading consultants in the country who's done more municipal networks than anyone else, and it's a small fraction of that number. When we put together the coalition, we're aware of the fact that we're obviously, expanding the geographical area. And because towns have expressed interest and are joining on, and we're in that process, that geographical area is not static. So we are dealing with discussions with certain vendors that would help us try to determine some kind of number. Once we have a static number of towns and geographical area, we're going to reach out obviously with RFPs and so forth, but we're going to have a much better idea of how much the consulting part of that would cost. Then the next part after that is, assuming we go forward with the project, I think all the towns agree that it's important not to do this through taxpayer funding. Nobody wants to raise their mill rate in order to get this done. In fact, the utility districts that I mentioned, let's just talk about Downey's Broadband, for example, they have built their network with not a dime of taxpayer funding, according to those officials. And it was all done through low-cost municipal loans that they received in grants. So through that process, through a couple of other ways of funding, another source is issuing revenue bonds. Another source is looking at what EC Fiber did in Vermont. EC Fiber has been very, very successful. They've built 2 networks in Vermont, and they've done it with private funding. They, for example, had three investors who came forward, each put in $250,000. So they started with a base of $750,000. Then they offered $2,500 shares to, businesses, the public, whomever wanted to come in, and they built these two networks based on that private funding. They have guaranteed a certain amount of profit by the 7th or 10th year, I've forgotten offhand. And they're well on their way to meeting or exceeding those expectations. So there's lots of different ways to do this. We have Steve Matteo that has joined our coalition with Camden National Bank. And he is helping us to look at these various financing options. And I know he was involved, at certain stages our Camden National Bank was involved at certain stages in the DBU efforts. So we're obviously open to working with any banks, but Steve Matteo is helping us navigate some of that. In terms of, I guess the last thing I would say before the Q&A is just that, how folks on this call could get involved. I mean, there's obviously the financial aspect of it in terms of investors that you might know or businesses that you might be connected to or know that would be important to the effort, but also spreading the word. Of course, we have to have our final catchy name before we can do that real effectively. But spreading the word and creating a buzz and a groundswell for this, because that's what it's going to really take at the end of the day. Okay.
Good, thanks. Next question, Deb, is from Sally Smith. Is there a map that shows the overlay or gaps for the different types of coverage in the Midcoast area?
Yeah, there are maps. In fact, there's a company called Vetro Mapping that has created a fantastic software platform that allows towns or customers to utilize their software to know exactly what is present in any given area within the state. And they work not throughout the United States, but they also work internationally. And because they're a Maine-based company, they have started a program called Vetro Cares for Maine. And they began one cohort, as they call it, and they're about to begin their second cohort, which I think our coalition is going to be a part of, where they grant us free use of the software. And so I think that the Vetro mapping software is going to be really key for us. There's also an effort that Maine Broadband Coalition has. There's a link that they have circulated, and if you haven't heard about it, that would be a great thing for anybody here to be involved in helping to circulate. And that is a link for a specific place to take a speed test. What happens is when you've got these large telecoms and providers, they have, they publish, they overstate what the speeds are. And without going into the detail of that, that's what happens. And so this particular speed test that the Maine Broadband Coalition is pursuing is an attempt to get the true accurate speeds around the state, from house to house and business to business. And I'd be happy to provide that link to anybody.
Okay, here's a very practical one, Deborah. What do we do if we seem to be in a dead zone? For example, in Camden, there's one between the bank and the Harbor Walk and a house out on Bayview Street. What does a resident do in those situations?
Advocate for fiber. No, sorry, that's that is a problem, certainly. And that's one of the problems that we see. I mean, while we have certain choices of large telecom, or no, let me rephrase that. We have a large telecom that provides us services around here. There are dead zones. And what this process is about is to have a choice of providers and a choice in competition and not a monopoly. In terms of actually being an absolute dead zone, I guess I'd have to know more. And I'm not the technician, but I do know some people who might be able to help.
Thank you. Here's another one from Barry Timms. Given that not all rural areas in Maine have practical access to fiber optic, what is the future for broadband, satellite, or wireless service for those rural areas?
Yeah, as I mentioned with 5G before, it can be a complement. It's certainly not a substitute for fiber, but it can be a complement. And there are new technologies that are, that they're coming up with from time to time. Again, none of those technologies are a substitute for fiber, but they are complements. And so one of the things that our coalition has to wrestle with is, do we want to bring fiber to every household or every business, or also if you have for example, a 2-mile driveway, I don't think that probably that fiber would go back down your own private 2-mile driveway. It would probably go to where the road stops. But there are then technologies that can help you get that last mile, so to speak.
Okay, from Kendall Joe Grindle, can you speak to the cost required for each town to join the DBU, and if there has been enough premise density or in their area for multiple providers to buy in?
Yeah, hi, Kendall Joe. I know. I don't think we've had a chance to talk personally, and I know you're with the Island Institute. So joining our coalition, there is no buy-in. We wanted to make this as accessible for everybody as we can in the region. Both Camden and Rockport have some money that they set aside in this year's budget, and in talking with the select boards and town managers, we're hoping to set aside a similar amount in the coming budget that we're budgeting for right now as we speak. For smaller towns, they would not be able to set aside as much money as, not that we've set aside a lot, but they wouldn't be able to meet the kind of contribution that we have. But there are ways that, first off, there's value. The way that we look at this is there's value that all towns bring to the table. For example, Camden and Rockport would not be able to get grant money because we're not considered underserved. And we also have, we're also too wealthy of an area, so to speak. On the other hand, there are more rural areas that have less density that would be able to get grant money to contribute to this process. So to the extent that we have rural towns that are able to get the grant money that we can't, that's a contribution that they make to the coalition. And, we recognize that as being valuable. So that's all part of the structure that I was talking about that we're doing, but we're trying to take into account all of those contributions to make it fair and accessible for as many towns as possible.
Thank you. This is from Joan Fopp. For consumers, how much more expensive will broadband access be compared to traditional high-speed internet? Can we make broadband affordable for low-income residents?
Yeah, on the low-income resident part of it, it's certainly a good question, and certainly one that we haven't addressed yet, but would be up to individual towns to take a look at. And maybe Kendall Joe can help me here with the, was it Vinyl Haven that put together the, one of the islands that put together with GWI, put together a fiber network for the entire island. And they did.
Islesboro,
thank you, Kendra. They did make that accessible for everybody on the island, and for those who couldn't, otherwise pay for the amount. And in terms of the broader question, the internet or fiber, in my experience, is actually cheaper. It's certainly more reliable and it's cheaper. So for example, in Rockport, we have the 1 gig mile network. I had to pay to bring it down 3 telephone poles, and it cost me quite a bit of money to do that. But once I did it, all the houses, which is just a few, that we passed along the way, were able to jump onto that network for free. That is a 1 gig network, and I pay $69.99 a month, and I have more internet speed than anybody could ever need, and it's for $69.99 a month. From there, I can stream anything. I can, you know, I don't have to have DirecTV. I don't have to have Verizon. I don't have to have Verizon. That's a different story. But I don't have to have a Spectrum in order
Got
to, you know. So I can't. That is not the amount that necessarily people would get 1 gig for, but that's an example of how it can be cheaper. And there are other programs out there that are cheaper than that, but for less than a gig.
Okay, Diane Lebson would like to know, how can potential investors get a prospectus for the funding opportunity?
That's an excellent question. I love it. This next step that I talked about is to have a consultant help us with the design, and what at the end product that we have not made a decision on any particular consultant. We are going to send out RFPs. We have been having discussions with one consultant who I've actually worked with before, but who the group has been extremely impressed with. But there's others out there. The end product that they give you is actually the financials, the pro formas that you need to actually take to the bank. So I think that in working with that consultant and with some outside counsel that we would be hiring, we would have it, but we don't have it yet.
I think that's it for questions,
Well,
unless
okay,
anybody.
See, I've got a couple here, Matt, that are a couple practical ones that are from Joan. Where can we get the articles you mentioned about the various aspects of internet usage?
Excuse me. Well, you can go to 2 different places. Rockport Town's website. They have a new website. And on the bottom, there's a scrolling sort of moving thing that says committees on it. And if you click on committees, it will take you to Midcoast Broadband Coalition, I think, in the drop down. And there you can find the articles. The other thing is we do have a blog website that we've set up temporarily, where it's still definitely under construction, at midcoastbroadband.com. And those articles are posted there too.
Okay, in the same vein, I think the same answer. The link to the speed test, where can you get a link to that speed test?
I think that it is also available on both places, but I will check as soon as we get off the phone. And if it's not, I'll make sure it is.
I think it is too. I've taken that test myself, and I think I got it from the same places. And I guess there's one last. You partially answered it, but maybe there's more to be said here from Chip Holmes. This is relative to the challenge in the distribution of fiber out in the rural areas. You were talking about that, where you wouldn't go down a long driveway. But is there any sort of hub type of distribution that could then further distribute from the hubs?
There is, and that's part of the design. And we have talked to at least one of the vendors that I've mentioned a couple of times without naming who it is. We have talked about those kinds of hubs. In fact, the hubs, you know, in any kind of design, there's going to be hubs in different places. And another thing that we're looking at along the same lines is, and this is in early stages, I'm sure you guys have all read about, you know, Summit Broadband coming down and installing natural gas down this way. We've also talked to them about the possibility of using their trenching on, you know, we hang fiber off of telephone poles, right? But there might be long stretches, and we have talked to some engineers about this, where we might be able to use their trenching efforts to trench some of the fiber too, for long swaths into the rural areas. That would be really fast and efficient for us if we could do that. Oh, and we have talked to Summit, who was interested in cooperating with us on that.
Okay. Matt, you see any more here?
I think Well, somebody just said, excuse my inattention, what does DBU represent?
That's Down East Broadband Utility, which is a utility that was created by Callis, Baileyville, and now Alexander is a part of.
And another one here, did you say what the target date timeline might be for a consultant report back to the group in hand would be?
Well, we have to choose the consultants and we have to have the money to hire the consultants. So I know that once we, at least this one consultant that we have spent some time with has told us that it would take about 4 months for them to do the consulting that would be necessary once we were to engage them.
Got it. Well, a question for myself, Deb, is the committee is obviously looking to figure out how we can keep the economic growth in the Midcoast area. And we want to attract, obviously, businesses and people to the area and want to sell them on the advantages. Obviously, we have the sea and we have a lot of natural advantages, but what would our pitch be with regard to fast internet for a company wanting to come in?
Well, it's cheaper, faster, more reliable. It's one of the things that we continue to say in our group. And I think in those 6 or 7 articles that I mentioned, it's really all laid out there quite well, Matt. And clearly it's all about living, working where you want to live as opposed to living where you work. And that is a huge trend economically, demographically right now. And this enables them to do that. I know I work for a corporation that if I didn't have high-speed broadband, I never could have worked remotely for them, an international corporation. And that enabled me to work here in Maine.
Got it. Thank you.
Joe has a question.
I think.
Yeah, you mentioned that you'd be expanding in Camden and Rockport, and I just wondered. You said the town had set aside money. Are there areas that are? Is there sort of a way that's going to roll out a little at a time, or how is it going to happen?
In terms of, okay, so between Camden and Rockport, we currently have 30,000 that was set aside for purposes of a consultant, consultant work. And that was a year ago before we were even close to, deciding exactly how we were going to approach this. We hope to more than double that amount. I think this time around in budgeting, I hope. And then, when we're hoping that Rockland, we're asking Rockland and Thomaston to add to that and other towns to contribute what they can. At the same time, we're trying to, as I mentioned, have a way in which we can sort of estimate what our costs are going to be for a consultant. We're doing certain things, counting miles, counting houses, counting commercial areas, gauging density in order to have all those various pieces that fit together. Then once you had a consultant, you had a design, then it would definitely have to roll out on a phased out approach. And most of the time that people have done the phase it are, regional utilities, for example, that I'm aware of, and other efforts that have gone down this route, they usually do the most dense places first. They bring that revenue in, a portion of that revenue in through the ISPs delivering services to the more dense areas, and then they phase and roll it out further.
Okay, maybe one last question, and I apologize if you've answered this, but juggling these chats, I might have missed it. What's the time frame here? What do you? Is this a 2-year, 5-year, 10-year? What's going to happen in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years from now? What might it look like?
I really don't want to get pinned down to that yet, Rich. It's just early.
Okay, so Chris.
Very diplomatically stated there, Deborah. And I want to thank you so much for joining us today. Getting broadband into, first of all, the coastal area we are now, and then expanding into